Absolutely not. Bill Clinton knew me and knew that I would do the right thing. John Podesta, who was his chief of staff, knew that also. I briefed John 2 or 3 times in that period to let him know what's going on, but I never received even the tiniest bit of pressure.
What's your take on what we're seeing right now, and how important is it for there to be adequate time for a transition?
Well, there's been a lot of people commenting and writing on that, and you just had 2 people talking about, I thought Liz Goodman's comments were right on about how more important it's going to get. I always have felt bad about that situation, but, Florida was in the balance with 537 votes, which is a tiny amount. We're talking about 200,000 or 300,000 now in the different states. So it really was clear to everyone. I mean, there might have been a few who thought George Bush had won clearly, but just about every awake American realized that it was too close to call. And the law was very clear to me. My job was to ascertain the apparent winner. It wasn't to make some kind of decision that felt better politically or not. I mean, I would like to have had Al Gore win, but that was never a consideration.
Already have delivered an ascertainment to President-elect Biden?
I don't want to answer for Emily. I think she's really serious. It's Emily Murphy, by the way. I think
Thank you.
She really genuinely wants to do the right thing. But I'll say this. She's in a tough spot because I haven't seen more than about 1 or 2 leading Republicans who are giving her any cover at all. They're saying, they should be saying that, in spite of what Trump has been saying, they should be saying that this election has been won by Joe Biden. They're not making it really hard for Emily Murphy. I think in the end, she'll make the right decision. I hope the end is sooner than later.
David Barham, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for correcting me. Emily Murphy, current GSA administrator. David, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
National security concerns now being raised as Trump loyalists take top Pentagon roles. The continuing fallout from Defense Secretary Esper's firing next.
Close-knit group of nurses who pulled together when their boss needed help battling coronavirus.
You're not just any patient, you're their friend.
These folks saved my life. Thank God that there are people who want to run towards a pandemic as opposed to running away from a pandemic.
White sandy beaches, crystal blue water. How incredible is that? We only get 1 shot at making the first impression. We're here to work, or you will be gone. High maintenance charter guest.
This crew needs to step it up.
New crew, perfect storm.
This is not open!
Get back to this boat now. Suck it up, cream puff.
Set your DVR to watch new episodes of Bravo's Below Deck every Monday after 9.
Watching NBC News Now. We've got some breaking news.
Are people there concerned about what impact this could have on the election?
It's news made for your streaming world.
I'll tell you what the American people's mandate is. Heal the nation. It's why he ran. That is why he won. That is the most critical near-term issue, managing the pandemic. It does seem as if these state polls...
The NBC News app.
I didn't know, was my child dead? Is my child passed out?
I just kept saying, please be okay, please be okay.
You rush your child to the hospital.
A woman came in, normal clothes. We get down the hallway, she closes the door. They were accusing me of child abuse.
And that's when the real nightmare begins.
Hey, calm down.
No, it's my children. I can't calm down.
Do No Harm, a new podcast series from NBC News and Wondery. First 2 episodes available now. Subscribe for free wherever you get your podcasts.
Despite the president's insistence that the election is not over, President-elect Biden and his team are hard at work on preparations to take office January 20th. And yesterday, he was asked about the president's refusal to concede.
I just think it's an embarrassment, quite frankly. The only thing that, how can I say this tactfully? I think it will not help the president's legacy.
NBC News correspondent Mike Memoli joins us now from a very rainy Wilmington, Delaware. Mike, I think you were the first reporter the president-elect called on, and in true reporter fashion, you didn't just give one, you gave like 3 questions. I was so proud and happy. But I do want to ask you, what did he have to say about the impacts of the president's unwillingness to admit defeat right now?
Yeah, I'm now the answer to an arcane trivia question, I guess. But it was an interesting opportunity, given now we're 4 days since the declaration, the projection that Joe Biden was the president-elect. And the Biden team really had hoped to hit the ground running. They had big plans to start sending officials into these agencies, to start taking stock of what needed to be done to get them ready for January 20th. They want the office space. They want the funding that's available to them under the transition laws that have been governing these last few transitions. And Democrats sounding the alarm, really, on Capitol Hill, especially about the fact that we still don't have this ascertainment that you were just talking to the former GSA administrator about that used to be rather pro forma. Biden, though, yesterday was taking a much more, let's say, wait-and-see approach, trying to downplay the concern that he has that this is going to affect his ability to start governing on day one. Take a listen to what he had to say when I asked him about this.
I'm confident that the fact that they're not willing to acknowledge we won at this point is not of much consequence in our planning and what we're able to do between now and January 20th.
Now, there's another significant issue that even some Republicans are raising questions about, and that is whether Biden should be getting access to what's called the presidential daily briefing. That's a much more detailed assessment of what are the ongoing threats facing the nation, some ongoing operations that the U.S. may be involved with, that the Office of the Director of National Intelligence says that they're not doing until we get this GSA ascertainment as well. Biden, though, once again, downplaying the significance of this, at least for the moment. Let's take a listen to that.
Well, look, access to classified information is useful, but I'm not in a position to make any decisions on those issues anyway. There's one, as I said, one president at a time, and he will be president until January 20th. It would be nice to have it, but it's not critical.
Now, for another Democrat, there may be even more concern if we were in this situation. But Biden, of course, for 8 years served as the vice president, also had access to the daily briefing during that time. He has a very experienced team of officials around him. So to some extent, it won't be a completely new situation for him when he does begin getting these briefings. He won't be starting from scratch, but still, it's going to be a lot for him in just 70 days. There may be things that he hasn't been briefed about that are new, and there are some serious national security implications to this, Lindsay.
Yeah, of course, many foreign relationships have since evolved. Today, President-elect Biden and Dr. Biden stopped at the Korean War Memorial in Philadelphia to honor veterans on this Veterans Day. We also know he took calls from various world leaders this week. We only learned about those from those leaders themselves. So how much information are we getting directly from the Biden team about what they're working on? And is there a reason that they're withholding some of this information right now?
Well, the pattern so far, Lindsay, seems to be that the world leaders themselves are the first ones disclosing these calls. We heard yesterday that the president-elect spoke with the leaders of Great Britain, of France, of Germany, also of Ireland. Not a surprise for an Irish American, a proud one at that, that Biden wanted to speak with their prime minister very quickly. But one point that's worth noting, that as part of this issue with the GSA, typically the State Department would be facilitating these calls, helping arrange them, make sure that all the protocols are being followed. But in this case, a lot of these calls are being returned without that facilitation. But it's interesting as well, some of the world leaders that have not, and actually still have not, said that they were going to call the president-elect We know that Russian President Vladimir Putin is among them, and Chinese President Xi Jinping as well. And so they're taking their cues, it seems, from the incumbent president and sort of waiting to see when we would get a clear victory, even though for all intents and purposes, Biden has already attained that.
Mike, before we let you go, I want to ask you about Senate Republicans. They're also refusing to congratulate President-elect Biden. These are people that Biden is going to have to work with come January. So do you think there will be bad blood here, or do you think there will be a clean slate once inauguration happens?
Yeah, it's been 12 years since Biden himself was in the United States Senate. And so he has some relationships with Republican lawmakers, but a number of them have since left the Senate. It was interesting during that press conference yesterday. One of the sort of themes, I think, of it was the fact that Biden kept downplaying doing what he did during the campaign, trying to de-escalate, lower the political temperature, as he often said. And so when he was asked about these calls from Republicans, whether he was getting some behind the scenes or whether he expected to, he said he looks forward, that he expects they all will eventually acknowledge his victory. But certainly a lot of Democrats on Capitol Hill wondering why we haven't seen more Republicans join their ranks, feeling that it's a negative signal to send to the country.
All right, Mike Memoli, thank you so much. Biden has promised to unroll President Trump's executive orders on immigration, but he faces an uphill battle. And it all may not happen all at once. NBC's justice correspondent Julia Ainsley has been taking a closer look at this for us. So first, let's talk about that big story this week, reuniting separated families. The Trump administration has yet to find the parents of 666 children. So how does President-elect Biden even begin to tackle this?
Well, not only has the Trump administration not been able to find them, the administration themselves completely shirked responsibility for finding and reuniting these families. This all fell to nonprofit lawyers who were being overseen by a federal judge. But the Biden administration wants to come and set up a task force for identifying and reuniting these parents on day one. But the issue here is that many of them have been deported, and it's not clear yet what process they might use to bring the parents back to the United States, or if they will bring them back to the United States. I started talking to people who are working out the logistics of this, and not only is it hard to go find all of these parents because the Trump administration did nothing to track these families when they separated them, it's then another hurdle to figure out, okay, now does this parent qualify to come to the United States and claim asylum? They haven't committed to how they're going to work that out just yet.
And Julia, I want to ask you about two more policies right now, and quickly if you could. But what are we expecting in a Biden administration regarding Dreamers, and also in regards to that Remain in Mexico policy, where those seeking asylum have to stay in Mexico while they're waiting for their U.S. hearings?
So on both of those, Lindsay, they need to act quickly. For Dreamers, we know that even though the Supreme Court upheld DACA and said that the Trump administration did not act constitutionally when they tried to strike it down, now there's another challenge coming up through the circuit courts that could make its way to the Supreme Court. So if the Biden administration wants to set DACA in stone and allow for Dreamers to get health insurance and better education, deals on education when they go to college, they need to try to enshrine that now, perhaps through a legislative fix, and then Remain in Mexico. We believe there are about 20,000 immigrants on the border living in terrible conditions in northern Mexico, waiting for their day in court to claim asylum. The Biden administration, the incoming Biden administration, wants to deal with those people, but the question is how? Do they just open the floodgates and let them all in immediately? Do they detain them while they're here? Because they don't want to overwhelm the system. It's a problem they're inheriting here. They didn't create this, but there are ways in which they need to fix this that haven't quite been ironed out yet.
All right, Julia Ainsley, thank you so much for your reporting. The Trump administration continuing sweeping changes at the Defense Department, promoting several controversial candidates into top roles Tuesday. The move coming after President Trump fired Defense Secretary Mark Esper Monday, leading 3 top officials in the department to hand in their own resignations. NBC News national security correspondent Courtney Cubey joining us now. Courtney, so much going on. Talk us through some of these staffing changes. Deep breath.
Yeah, that's right. So as you mentioned, Lindsay, I know, deep breaths, right? As you mentioned, there were 3 resignations this week. None of them were actually a huge surprise. So Jen Stewart, who was the chief of staff to Mark Esper, she resigned. Not a big surprise when your boss gets fired that you're probably going to leave as well. Retired Navy SEAL and Admiral Joe Kernan, he sort of headed up policy in the intelligence side of the Pentagon. He was also expected to retire at some point during this transition. He was one of the ones who left. One that was a little bit of a surprise was James Anderson. He was the head of policy for the department. It's one of the biggest jobs, civilian jobs in the building. He had had a number of clashes with the White House over issues. He resigned on Tuesday as well. But sort of the headline beyond that is who the White House put in to replace them. Retired Brigadier General Tony Tata. He will now be performing the duties of the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. The reason is he was actually nominated for the policy job several months ago, but he never went through Senate confirmation because it became very clear that the members of the Senate Armed Services Committee would never actually approve him. He's made a series of racist and anti-Muslim comments in the past. And armed position. So this is really a move for him. He's got a little more power now in this policy job, but he's not actually, he's already in the building. The second person, is the individual who replaced retired Admiral Joe Kernan, is Ezra Cohen Watnick. Now, you may remember his name, Lindsay. He worked for Mike Flynn, and then he bounced around to a series of other positions in the Trump administration. He's actually been in the building as well. Again, he was promoted up, though, for this job. The person you need to watch, though, is Kash Patel. He is now the new chief of staff to the acting Secretary of Defense, Chris Miller. Why you need to watch him is in that position, it's arguably one of the most powerful jobs in the building. He controls access to the Secretary of Defense, and he sets much of his agenda. So he has the position here, if there is some agenda that the Trump administration wants to push in the Pentagon in these last 70 days or so, Kash Patel has the ability to really get that in front of acting Secretary Miller and to make things happen there, Lindsay.
And thank you so much for breaking all of that down. Democrats are raising concerns about all of these changes in the midst of a transition between presidents. So what are the worries here, and what signal does this send to foreign adversaries?
The worries are, what do we not know could happen? So think about it. You know, one very public issue that Secretary Esper opposed with the president was the use of the Insurrection Act. That's still a concern. You know, the election is, while many people see it's decided, at least half the country sees that it's decided and that Joe Biden is the president-elect, there are a lot of people who still think that it's up in the air whether President Trump is actually going to serve a second term or not, particularly on the Republican side. So if that breaks into some kind of violence in the streets, would President Trump invoke the Insurrection Act, which would send active duty troops into the streets to stop protest? That is something that Secretary Esper, former secretary now, and many members of the senior military leadership at the Pentagon were opposed to. We don't know how Chris Miller, the acting Secretary of Defense, would feel about it. We do know now that he has 3 powerful influencers in the building who we know that they believe in President Trump's agenda and that they believe in a lot of his ideals. Would they try to influence Chris Miller to, in fact, to agree with the idea to send troops in? That's domestically. Foreign is another issue. The President Trump has tweeted and spoken repeatedly about wanting to bring troops home from overseas. Will he try to make some dramatic move and bring all troops home from Afghanistan and Iraq and perhaps Syria, potentially even trying to do it before the holidays like he's spoken about? That's another thing that the building's brass, the general officers and Secretary Esper have opposed. But now with these individuals in there, would there be less opposition, and could it possibly happen? What we have to remember is, at the end of the day, President Trump is still the commander-in-chief. And as long as he's giving those leaders a lawful order, they're obligated to carry it out or resign in opposition, Lindsay.
Courtney Kube, I am sure we will be talking to you again very soon. Thank you so much. As social media platforms crack down to stop the spread of disinformation during the 2020 election, supporters of President Trump have raised concerns about distrust. as well as a liberal bias, particularly on Facebook and Twitter. NBC News tech reporter Ben Collins joins us now. So, Ben, some conservatives are encouraging the president to leave Twitter. Of course, that's been his biggest outlet for the past 4 years. He told Leslie Stahl in 60 Minutes he doesn't know if he'd be elected without Twitter. And they're encouraging him to join Parler. This has been growing in popularity. What can you tell us about that platform?
Sure. It is sort of the last resort for people who get kicked off of Twitter. It has massive problems, which people who are new to Parler are realizing right now. First of all, it crashes all the time. Second of all, it doesn't have the sort of organizational tools that places like Facebook have. There are no events or groups or things like that. So people are going there to find the tools they had on Facebook, and they can't find them there. Now, the president may end up there anyway. Twitter said once he's out of office that he will be held to the same standard as every other private citizen. And right now, he's breaking the rules several times a day. If he really is part of the same 3-strike policy that everybody else has, he will be on Parler exclusively pretty soon.
Will Parler have the same effect, or will it mostly just be like yelling into an echo chamber?
It's yelling into an echo chamber. Other services have